Good morning and good afternoon, good evening, everyone. This is a new video. We're discussing another article, another software focused article. And this one is a mini article that's written by me. It's really inspired by this great book. It's called the Software Engineer's Guidebook. I recommend it. It's a very good book that talks about different aspects of software engineers' path, technical and non-technical aspects. And even I took this screenshot from this book. In this article, we were talking about the physics of software projects, which is an aspect that had been discussed in this book, and it's basically focuses on the main three pillars or three components that really affects a software engineer. So a software project, it affects the future of it, or the timeline, or the accomplishment, or the finishing and actually shipping this product or this project. Let's dive in. I'm starting this article with this screenshot, which basically has three main components in it. If you look at it, timeline, people, and scope. It's like a triangle kind of thing, and they have relation between each one. And it has this interesting sentence, which is if one of these changes, if one of these aspects changes, at least one other also needs to change in response. So imagine you are working on a project as part of five people or 5-person team. You have broken a project into milestones, features, components, epics, and stories, and set estimated timeline. Everything seems to be planned out. So you are now imagine that you are now in the planning phase of a new project. You are a team, you have 5 people in the team, you have timeline, deadline, and you also know the component. You broke down the project, you know the scope pretty well, and you broke down the components into separate ones, separate milestones, and all of that. And everything is planned out. We have our equation that actually gives us the results that we want. Okay? So everything is good until one of these scenarios happens, right? So first scenario is a team member leaves the project, or leaves the team, or leaves the company, which happens lots of times. It's the nature of software engineering projects and companies. People come, people go, and teams, of course. Maybe maybe you are the one who is leaving, or someone else. The company faces challenges and needs the project completed earlier than planned, which happens. Imagine you have a competitor maybe, and this competitor is launching this project before you, or just announced that they are launching a project, and they are beating you to market, so they are coming before you. And the third scenario is the project scope expands, and now we need to ship more features, because the project now should have these features to be able to compete, or to be able to, or the customer now change the requirements and need something more, right? So each one of these scenarios actually focuses on one component of those. So the first scenario actually is focusing on people. So you have now different number of people. Second scenario, we're focusing on timeline, which now you have a new deadline. It's now you have less time to ship the thing. And the third scenario actually focuses on scope. So we have more things you need to ship. Okay. So if you analyze each scenario, you will notice that that each impact one of these critical factors: people, timeline, and scope. First scenario people, second scenario timeline, third scenario scope. Okay. When one of these factors changes, it inevitably disrupts the balance. To address the issue, you have to adjust at least one of the factors. So what we are saying here that in each scenario you something change in one factor, right? And that's creates an imbalance, right? To return to the balanced state and to be able to have a viable equation that results into the success of this project or the shipment of this project, you need to adjust your formula a little bit. So how to adjust it? So one thing that we will talk about, okay, fewer people here mean that the work will take longer to complete. So here we are assuming that we have less people, the first scenario, and we are not changing the scope. So the scope is as it is, but we have fewer people. Now we need to change the timeline. We need more time. We need to extend the timeline a little bit. So what if we don't have this luxury of changing the timeline? The timeline stays as it is because we need to ship this project at this time. So we need to look at scope. So okay, let's just release the first version that has less features and then add these features in the next version, which will be planned after. Can we do that? We can't. Okay, let's add more people. And here comes a tricky part of adding new people is not as easy and it's not as rewarding as we all want it to be. Because if we are in a state that we are already in the project, deep in the project, like in the maybe before the timeline, like 1 month, 3 months before the timelines, it's like we built so many stuff and now we are like on the verge of finishing the project, which is like the last half of the project. It's hard to add people at a late state of a project because it's first adding new people kind of requires resources. Because if you add a new person to the project, they need time to adapt and to learn about that. They need context, right? And context requires people that helps this person to get this context. So you need people coming from your team helping the person to onboard. And that takes from their time and their efforts that were actually needed much in the project. So adding new people to a late state of a project, it's not always rewarding. And it's like it aligns with something called the Prox law. And Prox law states like adding manpower to a late software project makes it later. Here the author of the book that this article is inspired by actually has his own take on that, and he says that it's not always the case. It's not always the case of like when we add people to the timeline or add people to the project that will make it later, because sometimes if you plan the project to be totally have like this totally independent parts that doesn't really need much of context about other pieces, this will make it easier to add people to the project. And to be honest, I doubt like this case of having these kind of independent pieces. It happens, but not always. This is number one. And number two, and I think the most important part here is that if you are late in a project, like we are in the final states, these are the states when the integration actually happens. At the start, we focus on the individual pieces. So let's assume like I'm a part of the team and I'm responsible for the ingestion or delivery engine for something, and someone is responsible for like processing or ingestion or something. we are now working on very independent parts. He doesn't really need to have context about me, and I don't really need to have context about him at the beginning. We need to have context about the scope and what's needed, but this is all in the planning phase, and then everything is separated, every feature is separated, and each one can focus on something, right? But when you really go deep in a project, it comes the integration parts, when things start to talk to each other and things start to depend on each other. And this is where you have, like, you use your context, when this actually comes into play. So I think, from my perspective and from my experience on that, this really adding people to a late state of a project, it's not always the solution that I would go for. It's a solution, and it's a great investment for the long term. So long term, I now have someone I can depend on because he already has his own onboarding, and we can actually be more productive. But in the short term, adding people needs time and efforts, needs onboarding. And this is something I see sometimes management doesn't really see, that, oh yeah, you're now 10 people. You should make it in much less time than intended. But no, when people come to a project, they need to learn about it. They need to learn about the team, what we use, and all of that. And this takes time. This takes my time. So it's not only takes like time of the project, it takes my time that was actually needed to finish some stuff. And time and effort and all of that, it's and also when they start to be able to contribute to something, they will not be contributing in the same speed that others will contribute to. So it's this thing that's a bit tricky here. And to be honest, I'm more of like on the side of this statement. And so yeah, so mitigating these challenges, how we mitigate these challenges in the future. Let's just reiterate on these challenges. It's like either people, timeline, and scope, right? So one way to reduce the impact of these scenarios is to split the project into smaller independent components that don't rely heavily on each other's. Okay, that will help. That will actually help, but it will not solve the people issue, right? It's still in the path of adding people still is tricky. Is trickier than the timeline. Extending the timeline is trickier than changing the scope. This way, team members can work in parallel with less dependency. However, achieving this level of separation is often easier said than done, especially early in the planning phase. Yes. If these challenges resonate with you, okay, so it's basically I think anyone who worked in the industry at least for 5 years, they faced one of these challenges. And also they saw how dealing with these challenges with different aspects and different perspectives, how it ends up like, right? That's it. In brief, you change one, you need to change another one. You can't just change one and expect the same results as the original formula. All right, let me know if you have a different take or if you have a suggestion for our next subject we should discuss. Yeah, have a great day.